talk to Andy Brough. He's Executive Director at Schroder Investment Management. Do you feel safe, Andy, when you listen to those comments, or actually are they just in denial?
But the thing is, they're saying, yep, don't worry, we've bought this bank for 4 billion or whatever, but, where's the money coming from? It's all sort of, basically balancing on the ECB, which has been sort of going out and buying sort of Greek, Italian, Spanish bonds. And so, on one hand, at least they're kind of confessing to the sins of the past. And the only way you can get to the future is if you kind of ask forgiveness for the sins of the past. And so coming up and saying, yes, we've got a problem, we've got to write this off, or Erste Bank or whatever. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that now over the next few weeks. Banks actually putting their hands up and saying, yep, you know what, we've got some problems on our balance sheets as well.
But who's the next one, or who should be the next one to do that? Because there's been so much speculation about the French banks. And also, Journal du Dimanche was saying, well, look, guys, two banks are going to need recapitalization. And the government is just denying it flat out.
Yeah, but you would be. If you're the government, the last thing you want to say is, look, by the way, don't tell anyone, but we've got a real problem with the banks, because everyone's
But do they have a real problem with the banks?
They've got a problem because, in the sense that the assets on the banks, no one really kind of knows what they're worth. So, you've got the French banks, the German banks, and maybe, with people coming up now saying, look, we're having a bad time, then everyone releases bad news, and, you can only recapitalise if you know exactly what the extent of the losses and the write-downs are on the balance sheets, because there's no point coming out and saying, yeah, we're going to recapitalise everything, and everyone says, whoopee, and then they say, well, actually, 6 months down the road, we didn't actually raise enough money. So I think, the markets always, as we know, love certainty, and they'd like to see a sort of, let's have a warts and all look at the books and find out how much people need, and then you get confidence not only in the banks, but in the sovereigns. Yeah. There's no point having confidence just in one, because if you've got confidence in the sovereigns, you might not have confidence in the banks. And if you recapitalise the banks and you worry about the sovereigns...
You may get a credit downgrade at the end of the day. But Andy, talk me through what you're expecting. I mean, today we're expecting a little bit of a market rally. Is this going to be short-lived? Is what Angela Merkel and Nicolas Sarkozy said going to be enough to actually push it through? Well,
I think on Friday, if you'd asked me the same question, I would have said that the markets were looking for a bold statement and some sort of clarity coming out of the weekend. And what they've got is, don't worry, the combined geniuses of Sarkozy and Merkel and one or two other people is going to have a foolproof plan in 3 weeks' time.
You don't believe that at all, do you?
No, I do believe. I do believe they're going to come up with something, because they literally, what the market has been quite good at is effectively holding them by the ankles and dangling them over the abyss and saying, you're going to be out of a job and worldwide financial meltdown.
But Andy, it's two different countries with two very different banks. Germany say they don't have a problem, and it's the French banks that are the riskier ones.
Sorry, aren't they all in this together? They're all in the euro. They're in the euro.
Not like
But both sets of banks have a problem, and the problem is that the market doesn't believe what the banks are saying, and that's why I come back to what I said earlier. Actually, people rather they fessed up and say, look, these are the losses we've got. This is what we need recapitalising, and then you get a solid base. It's a bit like building, right? If you build a building on wonky foundations, it's going to collapse sooner or later. And what the market wants to see is that actually, can we get the position right now and then move forward?
All right, Andy, thank you so much for now. Andy Brough there from Schroder Investment Management.